Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Lafayette, Alabama, Sunday, January 19th, 2024, 5 o'clock p.m. 54-year-old James Cawthon was a battalion chief with the Coweta County Fire Department in Georgia, where he had worked for over 24 years. Reports are that he owned or maintained a property in Chambers County, Alabama, which is why he was so far from home on January 19th. While driving on County Road 267, Cawthon came upon a driver in distress who had just struck a deer. Cawthon had tried to help the man, but the area they were in had no cell phone reception. Neither man could get a signal. So they both walked to a nearby house to see if there was anyone there who could give them a phone to use. As they walked up the driveway, the homeowner suddenly came out gun in hand and opened fire on the two men. Cawthon wasn't armed at the time, but the driver he was trying to help was, and that man returned fire. During this exchange of gunshots, the driver was shot, as was James Cawthon and the assailant who had fired on them. By this point, first responders were on their way. Apparently, they had indeed somehow found out about the deer wreck. It's still not clear who exactly called the authorities or informed them about the deer wreck, but when they arrived on the scene, instead of finding a deer crash, they found 3 men all shot. The driver and the homeowner who opened fire on them were alive, but James Cawthon, however, was already dead. The motorist Cawthon had tried to help was airlifted to the hospital along with the assailant. The killer would be identified as 34-year-old William Franklin. At last report, he may still be in the hospital, but regardless, whenever he's released from the hospital, he's going to be facing murder charges. The Coweta County Fire Department is mourning the death of James Cawthon, and like a lot of people asking, how could this have happened? Well, here's an idea. The Republicans have spent decades pushing their stand your ground is absolute as far as legislation goes. And when you combine that with the Republicans' more recent jihad of legislation about making it where you can carry a gun anytime, anywhere, any place, but of course encouraging only certain individuals to do so, this is the end result. All of the racial immunity from law and the good old boy crap that happens in this country, especially in the southern states, that's what lays the groundwork for this to happen. Not surprisingly, the iron triangle of inbreds, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, leads the nation in gun deaths per capita. The national average for gun deaths is about 13.7 deaths per 100,000 residents. In Alabama, it's 25.6. Nearly double the national average. Alabama does not require background checks in order for someone to purchase a gun either, so what could possibly go wrong? And yet there are people asking, what's wrong with these people? Why do they keep doing this? Here's some examples. In April of 2023, Kaylin Gillis, a 20-year-old woman, was shot and killed after she and her friend mistakenly pulled into a stranger's driveway. That man opened fire on the two women, killing Kaylin Gillis. Kaylin was white, as was her killer. And that's why he's since been convicted and is now serving 25 years to life in prison. Now, that exact same month, you had the case of Andrew Lester, a white man who shot and attempted to kill a 16-year-old Ralph Yarl. This old thug actually shot the boy in the head. Miraculously, the bullet didn't injure the child's brain, and he's since gone back to high school. Both of these shootings happened in the exact same month, and yet while the killer of Kaylin Gillis has already been put on trial, convicted in January of last year, and is currently serving his sentence, the man who attempted to murder Ralph Yarl still hasn't been put on trial yet. In fact, the judges decided that the wheels of justice needed to grind to a halt so that they could entertain some sort of mental health argument, and Lester is trying to use the Castle Doctrine as his defense. It's questionable whether or not he's actually going to go on trial next month as he's supposed to. Now, if people actually want to pretend not to know why this is happening, it's because this society has spent decades conditioning certain people to think that they can kill with impunity. And not only is this deadly privilege not punished, it's almost never called out. Everyone is cousins with everyone else. Everybody covers for everyone else's criminality to the point that even killing becomes a casual thing. And as for the motive for this latest killing, it's because certain people have been conditioned to think that everyone's their enemy and out to get them, and they're fed a steady diet of they, and we all know who they are out to get you, and you need to be ready to kill them, and don't worry, the cops are going to go ahead and give you a wink and a nod. Police were called out at 5 o'clock p.m. because of this shooting. That means that this killing took place in the late afternoon or thereabouts. This was not during the evening hours or the short hours of the morning for that matter. We have an environment where the Kyle Rittenhouses can openly talk about how they want to kill protesters, then he crosses state lines, illegally carries an assault rifle, and commits a mass shooting, killing 2 people and injuring a third. And both the white media and the judge in the case ignored the law and bent over backwards to manufacture an acquittal for him. And it happened again in Texas, where Daniel Perry intentionally drove his truck into a crowd of protesters. He had planned to do so. He then murders one of the protesters, and then after he's convicted, the racist governor of the state abuses his pardon powers to release this murderer because he wanted to send a racial message. These politicians have been aiding and abetting these killings and encouraging them. These gun-toting thugs have seen how this society goes to insane lengths to define this as certain people's freedom, or rather as their power. They have the power to kill with impunity because it's been given to them by the state. But of course, power can't be power unless you use it. And even then, power isn't truly power unless it's abused, unless you demonstrate that you can do things that not everybody else is allowed to do. And yes, Lafayette, Alabama is a small town, only about 2,600 people. And yes, just like with the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery, this latest killer looks like your typical mountain man. All these inbred criminals look like they're trying to cosplay as a dog with no grooming. This was a mass shooting that happened in Alabama, and although 1 person died, 3 were shot, and the person who was killed was a first responder. Due to the bizarre circumstances, this ought to be front page news, right behind whatever idiocy the Orange Man is doing today. But a fire chief from Georgia is murdered in Alabama trying to help a motorist no less, and instead of giving him the national hero treatment, instead the white media decides to memory hold this when they bury it. Now, had Cawthon been black, there wouldn't even be any charges brought. The prosecutor would still be investigating, and the assailant would be allowed to go home and continue living his life. We all know this, because this is what always happens under those circumstances. And guess what? These thugs know it too, and this is what creates the legal and hence social climate for these crimes to occur. Were Mr. Cawthon black, we would be seeing the likes of Fox News and the right-wing hate radio sphere floating any and all manner of conspiracy theories and crackpot delusions in an attempt to justify the killing, to make it the fault of the victim, as they've done with every single black victim of white police and even civilian violence. And you cannot separate the racial environment from these crimes, because under white supremacy, nothing happens in a vacuum. And there's a reason you don't hear about these kind of things happening in the so-called hood. It's because black residents and certainly black homeowners understand that if they decide to shoot people merely for being in their driveway, they're not going to be going free. They're going to be charged and convicted. Look what happened with John White, the black homeowner in Long Island, New York. His teenage son was brutally attacked by a group of thugs at a so-called party, and then those same thugs then came to Mr. White's home in the middle of the night like some lynch mob. Mr. White and his family were actually being threatened. He didn't merely see some strangers in his driveway. These were the punks who had just assaulted his child. Mr. White defended his property against those violent thugs, and instead of being celebrated, he was railroaded into prison. That's what happens when a black homeowner uses his gun in a justified situation. But the person Mr. White was accused of killing was the wrong color for him to be defending himself against. The color-coded injustice system we have is what emboldens these killers to think that they can shoot people merely for setting foot in their yard and not go to prison. It's because this society and the white media has shown them numerous instances where there were people who did it, and they can all tell what it is that those folks have in common. Until that changes, nothing else will. But the foremost guarantee that white supremacy is made to those it classifies as white is that no one and nothing will interfere with their freedom. And by nothing, that includes the law. The Constitution won't apply depending on the color of the person they kill. In this case, William Franklin made a mistake. His victim wasn't black. But even so, his racial immunity is bound to kick in sooner or later. Sure, there's laws meant to protect first responders. But if they really want to deter individuals from harming them, then they need to enforce the law when everyone else is harmed by these privileged psychos. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Jacques Hargett, Henry Mitchell, Reginald Britt, Anthony Pollard, and Eric Boykin. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.